The courtroom fell into dead silence. The judge, a stern-looking woman in her late 50s, sat frozen on the bench. Her eyes widened in absolute shock. A drop of spit glistened on her cheek, slowly sliding down toward her chin. Gasps filled the air. The bailiffs stood still, uncertain of what they had just witnessed. The attorneys, who had been mid-argument, were now gaping, their words cut off by the unimaginable. A man, scruffy, unshaven, dressed in a wrinkled orange jumpsuit, stood before the bench, his chest heaving. His wrists were shackled, but his eyes burned with a fire that sent chills down everyone's spine. Did he just? The prosecutor whispered, unable to even finish his sentence. The judge's hand trembled as she slowly reached up to touch her cheek. The entire courtroom seemed to be holding its breath, waiting for what she would do next. Then, she stood up, and the room exploded. Guards rushed forward. The prosecutor backed away. The defense attorney put his hands up as if surrendering to the moment. The audience in the courtroom whispered in frantic voices, some even gasping out loud. The judge wiped her cheek with a trembling hand, her face unreadable. But in her eyes, there was something dangerous brewing. Then, she opened her mouth, and what she said next would change everything. The morning had started like any other in the courtroom of Judge Rebecca Haynes. She was known for her no-nonsense approach, her unwavering sense of justice, and the firm way she handled even the most difficult cases. On this particular day, she had a full docket. Theft cases, assault cases, even a domestic dispute hearing. But the case that stood out, one that she had specifically requested to handle herself, was the case of Nathan Carter. Nathan was a man with a tragic history. Homeless, alone, accused of assaulting a police officer after being found sleeping in a public park. The reports claimed he had resisted arrest, lashed out in anger, and thrown a punch. He had no family, no home, and, according to public records, no job in the last 5 years. His defense attorney, Mr. Wilkins, had pleaded with the court for leniency, arguing that Nathan had simply been trying to survive. But the prosecutor, Mr. Doyle, had no sympathy. This man is a danger to society, he had argued. He refused to leave the park when asked, attacked an officer, and has shown no remorse. We recommend the maximum sentence. Nathan had barely reacted to these words. He stood quietly, his eyes empty, his hands resting in the cuffs that bound his wrists. He was a man who had already lost everything. What more could they take from him? Judge Haynes, however, had studied his case carefully. She had seen the reports, but she had also seen something else. The desperation in his past. The moments where he had tried, really tried, to get his life together, only to be beaten down by circumstances. She had seen men like him before. She had seen what life did to them. That was why she had made a decision that shocked the entire courtroom. "Nathan Carter," she had said, adjusting her glasses and peering down at him, "I'm willing to listen to what you have to say." For the first time that day, Nathan's head lifted slightly. His eyes met hers. No judge had ever said that to him before. There was a moment of silence before Mr. Wilkins quickly whispered something to his client, urging him to speak. Nathan hesitated, then stepped forward. "I ain't got nothing to say," he muttered. The judge frowned. "That's unfortunate, Mr. Carter, because I am offering you a chance to tell your side of the story." Nathan shrugged. "What does it matter? You already think I'm guilty." The judge sighed. "That's not how this works. You have a voice, Mr. Carter. Use it." The entire courtroom watched, waiting for his response. But before he could speak, the prosecutor scoffed. "Your Honor, this is a waste of time. This man is a menace. His record speaks for itself." That was when Nathan snapped. His body shook. His fingers curled into fists. His eyes, once dull and lifeless, burned with something raw. "You don't know a damn thing about me," he shouted, his voice echoing through the courtroom. The bailiffs took a step forward, ready to subdue him if necessary, but Judge Haynes raised a hand, stopping them. "Then tell me," she said calmly. "Who are you, Nathan?" Nathan gritted his teeth. He didn't know what she wanted from him. He didn't understand why she was asking him these questions. No one had ever cared before. No one had ever given him a reason to explain himself. His breathing was heavy. The cuffs dug into his wrists. His entire life had been spent in the shadows, unnoticed, unwanted. And now this woman, this judge, she wanted to know his story? He couldn't handle it. The anger boiled inside him, mixing with years of frustration, rejection, and hopelessness. It built up in his chest, in his throat, until suddenly he couldn't hold it in anymore. And that was when he did it. That was when he spat. The spit flew through the air, hitting the judge's cheek before she even had time to react. And just like that, everything stopped. Time froze. The room held its breath. And Judge Rebecca Haynes, slowly, wiped her cheek. Her eyes darkened. The courtroom buzzed with shock. The bailiffs moved in, ready to tackle Nathan to the ground. But then she spoke. And the words that came out of her mouth, no one could believe them. The courtroom was still frozen in shock. Everyone expected the judge to explode with anger, to lash out, to order Nathan Carter to be thrown in a cell for contempt of court. But that's not what happened. Judge Rebecca Haynes slowly wiped her cheek with a tissue, her expression unreadable. The room was silent, waiting, breath held tight in their chests. The bailiffs were at the ready, standing on edge, expecting her command. But then, she did something that no one could have predicted. She laughed. It wasn't a loud, mocking laugh. It wasn't cruel. It was soft. A chuckle of disbelief. A laugh that carried something much deeper than amusement. It carried understanding. Nathan Carter's eyes widened in confusion. His whole body tensed as he braced for whatever was about to happen next. Judge Haynes sat back in her chair and stared straight at him. "You think that's the worst thing that's happened to me, Mr. Carter?" she asked, shaking her head. "Do you really believe spitting at me is going to make me stop listening to you?" Nathan said nothing. His breathing was still ragged, his face still burning with rage, but his fists loosened slightly. The judge continued. "Bailiffs, stand down." The guards hesitated. One of them, Officer Reynolds, stepped forward. "Your Honor, with all due respect," I said, "stand down." Slowly, the officers obeyed. They stepped back, but their eyes stayed locked on Nathan, ready to act at the first sign of aggression. Judge Haynes leaned forward, resting her elbows on the bench. "Now, Mr. Carter, you have my full attention, but if you don't want to speak, I won't force you. I'm not here to humiliate you." Nathan's throat tightened. No one had ever spoken to him like this before. Not the police, not the lawyers, not even his own parents when they were alive. "Why?" he muttered. The judge tilted her head. "Why what? Why do you care?" His voice was hoarse, filled with both anger and exhaustion. "You're just like the rest of them. Rich, comfortable. You'll go home after this and never think about me again. You think you're doing some good deed, acting like you care, but you don't. You don't know what it's like." His words carried pain. Years of being overlooked, of being abandoned. And yet, Judge Haynes didn't flinch. Instead, she leaned in even closer. "I don't know what it's like to be you, Nathan, but I do know what it's like to feel invisible." Nathan's jaw clenched. "Yeah? And what does a judge know about that?" Judge Haynes didn't answer right away. For the first time, there was a flicker of something personal in her expression, a glimpse into something deeper, something she had buried long ago. But she shook it off. This wasn't about her. This was about him. She took a deep breath and spoke with authority. "You are facing up to 5 years in prison, Mr. Carter. But before I make my ruling, I need to understand. What happened that night?" Nathan didn't respond at first. His gaze dropped to the floor. "I read the report," she continued. "The officer claimed you resisted arrest, that you threw a punch, that you acted violently." Nathan's fists clenched again, but this time, it wasn't out of anger. It was out of frustration. "You don't know the whole story," he muttered. "Then tell me," she urged. For a long time, he remained silent. The courtroom waited, holding its breath. Even the prosecutor, Mr. Doyle, crossed his arms, watching carefully. Finally, Nathan spoke. "I was just trying to sleep," he said quietly. "That's it. I was in the park because I had nowhere else to go. It was cold, and I just needed a place to rest." His voice was low, but the emotion in it was undeniable. "The cop woke me up, told me I had to leave. I told him I didn't have anywhere to go. He didn't care. He kept shoving me, yelling at me like I was some kind of animal. His breathing grew heavier. His hands curled into fists again, not out of violence, but out of the painful memory. I begged him to let me stay until morning, just until morning. But he laughed, called me a waste of space. Then he grabbed my arm, twisted it back. It hurt like hell he swallowed hard. I panicked. I pulled away, and he lost his balance, fell back. Next thing I knew, I was on the ground with his knee in my back. He kept hitting me, saying I was resisting. The courtroom was dead silent. Judge Haynes studied him carefully. Mr. Doyle shifted uncomfortably. He had seen many cases, but this one felt different. Nathan exhaled sharply. I never threw a punch. I never attacked him. I just wanted him to stop. His voice cracked, and for the first time, the courtroom saw him, not as a criminal, not as a case number, but as a human being. Judge Haynes took a deep breath. She turned to Mr. Doyle, the prosecutor. Do you have a response? Doyle hesitated. He had come into this case convinced that Nathan Carter was dangerous, but now, looking at him, hearing him, he wasn't so sure. Doyle cleared his throat. I would like to review the officer's body cam footage before proceeding further. The judge nodded. That's fair. I'll give you 48 hours. Nathan's eyes widened. Wait, you actually believe me? I believe in facts, Mr. Carter, she said firmly. And if there's evidence that supports your claim, I won't ignore it. Something in Nathan's face softened. It was barely noticeable, but it was there. Judge Haynes stood. Court is adjourned until further notice. The bailiffs approached Nathan to escort him back to holding. But before they could take him away, Judge Haynes spoke again. One more thing, Mr. Carter. He turned, unsure of what to expect. She looked him dead in the eyes. You may feel invisible, but I see you. His breath caught. For a moment, just a moment, he didn't feel like a lost cause. He felt human. But before he could process it, before he could even begin to understand what it meant, a sudden shout erupted from the back of the courtroom. A woman, dressed in a long black coat, stormed forward. Her face was red with rage, her hands clenched at her sides. This man is a liar, she screamed. The bailiffs rushed toward her, but she didn't stop. She pointed a shaking finger at Nathan, her voice filled with fury. He deserves to rot in prison. You don't know what he's done. You don't know the truth. The courtroom erupted in chaos. People gasped. Some tried to hold her back. And Nathan? Nathan went pale, because he knew exactly who she was. And he knew what she was about to say could destroy everything. The woman's voice rang out through the courtroom, piercing the tense silence. Her eyes blazed with anger, and her finger pointed directly at Nathan. You don't know the real him, she shouted. He's dangerous. He's a monster. Judge Haynes raised her gavel, attempting to restore order. Ma'am, you need to calm down and identify yourself. The woman ignored her, pushing past the startled bailiffs. You think he's innocent? You think he's some poor victim? Well, you're wrong. Nathan's face went pale. His eyes flickered with a mix of fear and recognition. He tried to step back, but the shackles on his wrists kept him tethered. Judge Haynes leaned forward, her voice stern. Ma'am, this is a court of law. If you have evidence or testimony relevant to this case, you'll need to present it properly. State your name and your connection to Mr. Carter. The woman stopped, breathing heavily. She met the judge's gaze with a fiery determination. My name is Emily Carter, she announced. And I'm his sister. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Nathan's head dropped, his shoulders sagging. The tension in the air grew thick, the shock of the revelation hanging heavily over everyone. Judge Haynes raised an eyebrow. Sister? Mr. Carter, is this true? Nathan didn't respond. He kept his head down, avoiding her gaze. Emily continued, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and desperation. He's not who you think he is. He's been lying his whole life, manipulating people, stealing from everyone who tried to help him. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears as she turned back to the judge. I know he looks like a victim, but he's not. He destroyed our family. He stole from our mother, He betrayed our trust, and he left me to pick up the pieces. Nathan flinched at her words, the pain of her accusations cutting deep. His fists tightened, his knuckles white with tension. Judge Haynes observed the scene carefully, her eyes moving between the distraught woman and the silent man standing before her. "Miss Carter," she said calmly, "I understand you're upset, but this is a serious accusation. If you have evidence to support your claims, you'll need to present it." Emily's voice cracked with emotion. "Evidence? I have more than enough evidence. I've got years of broken promises, stolen money, and lies. Ask him where he's been all these years. Ask him why he didn't show up when our mother was dying." The courtroom fell into a stunned silence. Nathan's face remained downcast, his expression unreadable. But his body was rigid, his jaw clenched tight. Judge Haynes sighed, her patience being tested. "Mr. Carter, do you have anything to say in response?" Nathan's voice was barely a whisper. "She's telling the truth." Emily's eyes flashed with triumph. "See? He admits it. He's always been a liar and a thief." Nathan finally looked up, his eyes filled with a deep, haunting sadness. "I'm not a perfect man," he said, his voice hoarse. "I made a lot of mistakes. I hurt people I cared about, but I never meant to." Emily scoffed. "Never meant to? That's your excuse? Do you have any idea what you put me through? What you put Mom through?" Nathan's eyes glistened with tears he refused to let fall. "I know, Emily. I know I messed up. I know I left you to deal with everything. But I'm trying now. I'm trying to make things right." Her expression hardened. "It's too late for that, Nathan. You don't get to play the victim here." Judge Haynes interrupted, her voice cutting through the tension. "Miss Carter, if your brother is willing to admit his wrongs and accept the consequences, then why are you here? What do you hope to achieve?" Emily hesitated, her eyes flickering with a mix of pain and anger. "I just want him to face the truth, to finally take responsibility for what he's done. All my life, I've watched him run from his mistakes. It's time he stopped." The courtroom grew quiet again, the weight of her words pressing down on everyone. Nathan's shoulders slumped, his spirit seeming to break under the weight of his past. Judge Haynes took a deep breath, her gaze softening slightly. "Mr. Carter, you've admitted to making mistakes. You've acknowledged your sister's pain. But the question remains, are you willing to take responsibility now?" Nathan looked up, his eyes meeting hers with a glimmer of determination. "Yes, Your Honor. I'm ready to face the truth, whatever the cost." Emily's expression shifted, surprise flickering in her eyes. She hadn't expected him to say that. For years, she had seen him as a coward, a man who would rather run than own up to his actions. Judge Haynes nodded slowly. "Very well. We'll continue this hearing, but I want both of you to understand something. This court is not just about punishment. It's about justice. And sometimes, justice means more than just a sentence." Before anyone could react, the heavy doors of the courtroom burst open with a loud crash. A man in a police uniform stormed in, his face pale with urgency. "Your Honor," he shouted, his voice filled with panic. "We have a situation." The courtroom erupted in confusion. "What's going on?" Judge Haynes demanded, her voice sharp. The officer's eyes darted to Nathan, then back to the judge. "It's Officer Grant, the one involved in Mr. Carter's arrest. He's been attacked. He's in critical condition." The courtroom froze. All eyes turned to Nathan, suspicion and shock rippling through the crowd. Emily's expression shifted from anger to confusion. "What does that have to do with my brother?" The officer hesitated, glancing nervously at Nathan. "Because, ma'am." Officer Grant named Nathan as his attacker. Gasps filled the room. Nathan's eyes widened in disbelief. "What? No, that's not true." Judge Haynes' expression grew grim. "Mr. Carter, you have the right to remain silent." The bailiffs moved in, their grips tightening on his arms. The courtroom descended into chaos once more, voices rising in a panicked din. Nathan struggled against their hold, his voice breaking with desperation. "I didn't do it. I swear. I was here, right here in court. This is a setup." But his protests were drowned out by the rising tension. the shocking accusation casting a dark shadow over everything. And as he was dragged away, his eyes met Judge Haynes, a silent plea for help, for someone to believe him, for someone to see the truth. The cold steel of the handcuffs bit into Nathan's wrists as the bailiffs dragged him toward the side exit of the courtroom. His mind spun, heart pounding against his ribs. "This is a lie," he shouted over the noise. "I was here. I didn't touch him." Judge Haynes slammed her gavel, her voice booming over the chaos. "Enough." The courtroom fell into uneasy silence, the tension so thick it felt like a storm about to break. She turned her sharp gaze to the officer who had burst in moments before. "Officer, you're telling me that Officer Grant was attacked? When?" The officer swallowed. "About 20 minutes ago, Your Honor. He was found in the station's parking lot, barely conscious. Before he passed out, he identified Nathan Carter as the one who did it." A ripple of murmurs spread through the room. The judge's expression darkened. She turned to Nathan. "Mr. Carter, you were in my courtroom the entire time." "Yes, exactly." Nathan's voice was raw, desperate. "This doesn't make sense. How could I have attacked him when I've been in shackles, in front of you, for the past hour?" The officer shifted uneasily. We don't know how. But we have a statement from Officer Grant, and that's enough to bring him in for further questioning." Judge Haynes inhaled sharply, her fingers tightening on the bench. "Mr. Carter is already in custody. If you think he committed another crime, you'll need actual proof, not just a statement from a man in critical condition." Emily, who had been standing frozen in the middle of the courtroom, suddenly found her voice. "Wait, you're saying my brother is being framed?" Nathan turned to her, his expression pleading. "Emily, you have to believe me. I didn't do this." Emily's face twisted with emotions, anger, doubt, and something else. Something she had buried for years. "I don't know what to believe anymore," she muttered. Judge Haynes straightened her shoulders and looked at the officer. "Has any security footage been reviewed? Any witnesses? Or are we just taking a half-conscious statement as truth?" The officer hesitated, clearly unprepared for such a challenge. "Not yet, Your Honor, but—" "Then I suggest you do your job before dragging a man back to prison for a crime he couldn't have committed." The courtroom buzzed with tension. The officer looked as though he wanted to argue, but Judge Haynes' expression left no room for debate. The bailiffs loosened their grip on Nathan, though they didn't release him entirely. Judge Haynes rubbed her temple, exhaling slowly. "This is what we're going to do. Officer, I want that footage reviewed immediately. If there's anything that supports this accusation, bring it to me. Until then, Mr. Carter remains in court custody, not transferred to another facility." "Understood?" The officer gave a stiff nod. "Yes, Your Honor." He turned and left, but the unease in the room remained. Nathan swallowed hard. His knees felt weak, his body exhausted. He turned his eyes back to his sister. "Emily, please," he whispered. "You know me." Emily's lips parted slightly, hesitation flickering in her eyes. She had been so sure, that Nathan was just a liar, a thief, someone who had abandoned their family without a second thought. But now she wasn't so sure. Judge Haynes stood from her seat. "This hearing is postponed until further notice." Court dismissed. The sound of the gavel echoed through the room, but no one moved. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Nathan was led to a small holding room inside the courthouse, a step up from a jail cell but still suffocating. He sat in silence, staring at the wall, his mind racing. Who was doing this to him? Who wanted him locked away so badly that they'd go this far? His thoughts were interrupted when the door creaked open. Judge Haynes stepped inside, closing it behind her. She studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "You have enemies, Mr. Carter?" she asked. Nathan exhaled a shaky breath. "I don't know. I don't think so. But I guess I must." She folded her arms. "I believe you didn't attack Officer Grant." Nathan blinked. "You do." She nodded. "You were in my courtroom when the attack happened." "That's undeniable." He let out a breath of relief. "Thank you. But," she continued, "that doesn't mean you're innocent of everything else." His shoulders stiffened. She sighed, sitting down across from him. "You've hurt a lot of people, Nathan. Even if you didn't do this, your past is still catching up with you. And it seems like someone out there wants to make sure you never get the chance to fix things. He clenched his jaw. I want to fix things. I really do. But I don't even know where to start. Judge Haynes gave him a long, measured look. Then she did something unexpected. She reached into her briefcase and pulled out a file. What's that? Nathan asked warily. Your life, she said simply, setting the file down on the table. Your arrests. Your failures. But also your attempts to change. Nathan frowned, confused. You worked at a shelter for a few months, didn't you? She asked. His throat tightened. Yeah. And you tried to get into rehab once. His jaw clenched. Yeah. And you took the blame for something that wasn't yours, to protect a friend. Nathan looked down at the table, unable to meet her eyes. Judge Haynes leaned in. You are not a lost cause, Mr. Carter. But you need to decide what kind of man you're going to be. Nathan swallowed hard. I don't think I get to decide anymore. The judge raised an eyebrow. That's where you're wrong. A knock came at the door, breaking the moment. Judge Haynes stood up. We'll find out the truth about Officer Grant. Until then, I suggest you think about what you want to do with the time you have left. With that, she walked out, leaving Nathan alone with his thoughts. Meanwhile, outside the courthouse, Emily Carter stood in the parking lot, arms wrapped tightly around herself. She had come here full of anger, ready to expose her brother as a fraud, ready to watch him finally face the consequences of his actions. But now she felt lost. Was he lying? Had he really changed? She didn't know anymore. The cold wind bit at her skin as she turned to leave. And that was when she heard it. A whisper. A voice. She turned sharply, but the parking lot was empty. A shiver ran down her spine. Then, just as she was about to get into her car, a dark figure emerged from the shadows. And before she could react, a strong hand clamped over her mouth, and everything went black. Emily's world went dark. The last thing she remembered was the rough grip over her mouth, the scent of something chemical filling her nostrils, and the sharp sting of fear flooding her veins. Then, nothing. Silence. Blackness. When she finally stirred, a groggy fog clung to her mind. Her body felt heavy, her limbs sluggish. She tried to move but quickly realized her wrists were bound. The cold bite of zip ties dug into her skin. Her heart pounded. Where am I? Her breath came out in short, shaky gasps as her senses slowly adjusted. The dim light overhead flickered, casting eerie shadows against cracked concrete walls. The air smelled of dampness and something metallic. Blood? She wasn't alone. A low voice spoke from somewhere in the darkness. You shouldn't have come to court today, Emily. Her blood ran cold. She twisted her head toward the voice, her heart slamming against her ribs. A figure stood in the shadows, just out of reach of the light. Who are you? She croaked, her throat dry. The figure stepped closer, just enough for her to make out the glint of something metallic at his waist, a gun. That's not important, he said. What's important is that you forget everything you saw today. You forget about your brother. Emily's breathing grew ragged. Is this about Nathan? Who are you working for? The man chuckled, a deep, chilling sound. I'm doing what needs to be done. Emily's pulse pounded. She knew fear. She had lived with it her whole life, growing up with an unreliable brother who had disappeared when she needed him most. But this was different. This was life or death. She clenched her jaw, forcing herself to stay calm. You're making a mistake, she said, trying to steady her voice. If you hurt me, people will come looking. The man scoffed. You think anyone cares enough to come looking for you? His words cut deep, but Emily swallowed the sting. Judge Haynes knows I was in court today. If I disappear, it won't go unnoticed. The man was quiet for a moment, considering. Then he sighed. That's the problem. Judge Haynes is asking too many questions. She was supposed to send your brother away quietly. But now she's interfering. Emily's stomach dropped. You want Nathan in prison, she whispered. This is a setup. The man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Smart girl. She clenched her fists, feeling the tight plastic of the zip ties cut into her wrists. Why? What did Nathan do to you? The man's expression darkened. Nathan Carter was supposed to be a nobody, a man with no future, no voice, no way to fight back. But now, thanks to your little outburst in court, people are paying attention. Emily's heart pounded. She had walked into that courtroom thinking she was doing the right thing, exposing her brother for who he really was. But now, she realized she had played right into the hands of something much bigger. Nathan wasn't just a homeless man with a criminal past. He was a target. And whoever this man was, he was making sure Nathan never got the chance to prove his innocence. Emily took a slow, steady breath. "You can't keep me here forever," she said. "Someone will find me." The man tilted his head, studying her. "Maybe," he admitted. "Or maybe, I make sure you never get the chance to talk." Her stomach lurched. No, she had to get out of here. Now, Emily's mind raced, searching for a way to escape. Her wrists were bound, but her legs were free. If she could just... The man's phone rang, the sudden sound making her jump. He cursed under his breath and turned away, answering the call. "Yeah. No, she's here. No, not yet. I'll take care of it." This was her chance. Summoning every ounce of strength she had, Emily lunged forward, ramming her shoulder into his side. The man let out a grunt of surprise, stumbling backward. She twisted, kicking at his knee, just like she had learned in self-defense classes years ago. The man cursed again, but before she could make another move, he swung his fist. Pain exploded across her cheek as she hit the ground hard. Dizzy, she struggled to get up, but he was already towering over her, his breath heavy with rage. "Bad move," he growled. Emily braced for the worst, but then, bang, the door burst open. A flood of light spilled into the room, and before Emily could process what was happening, a group of men in black tactical gear stormed in. FBI, hands in the air. The man spun, reaching for his gun. Bang! A single gunshot rang out. Emily screamed as the man collapsed to the floor, his weapon clattering beside him. Heavy footsteps rushed toward her, and a familiar voice called out, "Emily, Emily, are you okay?" Her vision blurred, but she recognized the voice. Judge Haynes. Strong hands lifted her up, and suddenly she was surrounded by officers, untying her hands, checking her for injuries. The man on the ground groaned in pain, clutching his shoulder where he had been shot. Emily's breath came in shuddering gasps as she clung to the first solid thing she could, Judge Haynes' arm. "You found me," she whispered. The judge nodded, her face filled with concern. "We tracked your phone when you didn't return to your car." "Good thing we did." Emily's knees wobbled, but she forced herself to stand. She turned her eyes to the man on the ground. "Who is he?" One of the agents knelt beside the wounded man, pulling out a badge. "We'll find out soon enough." Emily's mind swirled with 1,000 questions, but one thing was clear. This wasn't over. Not even close. And somewhere, sitting in a courthouse holding cell, her brother had no idea that the fight for his freedom had just taken a deadly turn. Nathan sat on the hard bench in the courthouse holding cell, staring at the dull gray walls. His hands were still cuffed in front of him, his wrists sore from the restraints. He exhaled sharply, his mind spinning. First, the false accusation of attacking Officer Grant. Then, his sister showing up out of nowhere, filled with anger. Now, he was sitting in this tiny room, waiting for someone to tell him what came next. His whole life, he had felt powerless, like a puppet being pulled by strings he couldn't see. But this was worse than anything he had been through before. The door creaked open, and Nathan tensed. Judge Haynes stepped inside, followed closely by an FBI agent in a dark suit. Nathan's eyes darted between them. Something was wrong. The judge's face was tight, her usual calm expression shadowed by something darker. "Nathan," she said, sitting across from him. "We need to talk." Nathan leaned forward, his stomach twisting. "What happened?" Judge Haynes hesitated, then exchanged a look with the agent. The man was tall, broad-shouldered, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. He introduced himself as Agent Tomlin. "Nathan," Agent Tomlin began, "we have reason to believe that someone is trying to keep you behind bars, and they're willing to go to extreme lengths to make sure that happens." Nathan felt his chest tighten. What does that mean? The judge sighed. It means that earlier tonight, your sister was kidnapped. Nathan's whole body stiffened. His breath caught in his throat. What? She's safe now, Agent Tomlin said quickly. We found her in time. Nathan's heart pounded. Who took her? We don't know yet, the agent admitted. But we know this much. Whoever it was, they're connected to the false accusation against you. This isn't just about a simple arrest. Someone wants you locked up for good. Nathan's hands curled into fists. Emily, is she okay? Judge Haynes nodded. She's shaken, but she's strong. She fought back. If we hadn't found her in time, though, she didn't finish the sentence. Nathan swallowed hard, his emotions raging inside him. He had spent so many years thinking Emily was better off without him, that she had built a life free from the mess he had become. And now, because of him, she had almost died. Nathan leaned back against the wall, staring at the ceiling. This is bigger than me, he muttered. Yes, Agent Tomlin agreed. It is. And we need your help to figure out why. Nathan scoffed. Help? I'm the one locked up, remember? The judge's expression didn't change. For now. Nathan frowned. What do you mean? Judge Haynes folded her hands. I believe you're innocent in Officer Grant's attack. And after what happened to Emily, it's clear that someone is orchestrating this. So I'm offering you a deal. Nathan raised an eyebrow. A deal? Agent Tomlin leaned forward. We get you out of here. Not as a free man, but as someone working with us. You'll wear a tracker, you'll be under supervision. But you'll have the chance to help us uncover who's really behind all this. Nathan let out a bitter laugh. So you want me to be bait? Judge Haynes didn't deny it. You're the only one who can draw them out. Right now, they think you're powerless. We need to make them believe you're still playing their game while we get to the truth. Nathan rubbed his temples. Everything inside him screamed to say no, to run, to hide, to let someone else figure this mess out. But then he thought of Emily. He thought of the way she had looked at him in the courtroom, filled with rage and pain. He thought of how she had been taken because of him, and suddenly, running wasn't an option anymore. He met the judge's eyes. If I do this, I need to know that Emily is safe. I need to talk to her. Judge Haynes nodded. That can be arranged. Nathan exhaled slowly. Fine. I'll do it. Agent Tomlin gave a small, approving nod. Good. Then let's get you out of here. Hours later, Nathan stepped out of the courthouse, breathing in the crisp night air. He was dressed in plain clothes now, the jumpsuit gone. But the ankle monitor strapped tightly around his leg was a reminder that he wasn't truly free. Judge Haynes stood beside him, her arms crossed. Emily is waiting inside the safe house, she told him. She wants to see you. Nathan's chest tightened. What was he supposed to say to her? Go, the judge said softly. It's time. Nathan hesitated, then walked toward the black SUV parked near the curb. An officer opened the door, and he climbed in. Emily was inside, sitting stiffly in the corner of the seat, her arms wrapped around herself. She looked up as he entered, her eyes dark with exhaustion. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then she spoke. You almost got me killed, Nathan. Her voice wasn't filled with anger this time, just raw truth. Nathan swallowed hard. I know. Emily exhaled sharply, running a hand through her hair. I don't even know what's happening anymore. 1 minute, I think you're the same guy who destroyed our family. The next, I don't know who you are. Nathan looked down. I don't know who I am either. Emily studied him for a long moment, then shook her head. What did they tell you? That someone is trying to frame me, and that you got caught in the middle. Emily scoffed. Yeah, I noticed. Silence filled the car. Then, finally, Emily spoke again, softer this time. If I ask you something, will you tell me the truth? Nathan nodded. Yeah. Emily's voice was barely a whisper. Did you really steal from Mom? Nathan's chest tightened. His throat burned. He could lie. He could say what she wanted to hear. But for once in his life, he chose the truth. Yes, he admitted. I did. Emily's breath hitched. She looked away, her jaw clenched tight. I was a mess, Nathan continued, his voice hoarse. I thought I could fix things, thought I could make it up to you both. But I failed. Silence stretched between them. Then, to his surprise, Emily let out a shaky breath. I already knew, she admitted. I needed to hear you say it. Nathan felt something in his chest crack wide open. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was something. Emily exhaled sharply. So, what do we do now? Nathan leaned back in his seat, his fists tightening. We find out who's doing this, he said. Emily met his gaze. And this time, for the first time in years, she didn't look at him like a stranger. She looked at him like family. Nathan sat in the dimly lit safe house, staring at the ankle monitor strapped to his leg. The weight of it felt heavier than the actual device, like a reminder that even though he was outside a cell, he was far from free. Across from him, Emily sat on the edge of the couch, arms crossed tightly over her chest. They hadn't spoken much since their conversation in the SUV. The silence between them was thick, filled with years of unsaid words and broken trust. Agent Tomlin stood by the door, speaking in low tones with another officer. Judge Haynes had left a few hours ago to handle legal matters, but she had made it clear. Nathan wasn't going anywhere until they figured out who was behind this setup. Nathan exhaled sharply and turned toward his sister. You should leave, he muttered. Emily scoffed. And let you deal with this alone? Yeah, right. Nathan frowned. Emily, you almost got killed. This isn't your fight. Emily's jaw clenched. It became my fight the moment someone grabbed me off the street and tried to make me disappear. Her voice wavered slightly, but she masked it with anger. I'm not going anywhere. Nathan rubbed his face, exhaustion settling deep in his bones. He had spent years trying to keep Emily away from the mess that was his life. And now, because of him, she was tangled in something dangerous. Agent Tomlin turned toward them, arms crossed. We need to go through every detail of your past, Nathan. Every person you've ever crossed, every enemy you might have made. Nathan let out a humorless laugh. That's a long list. The agent wasn't amused. Start talking. Nathan exhaled. All right. There was a guy I used to run with back in the day. Name was Eddie Lawson. We got into some trouble together. Small-time stuff, mostly theft. But one night, he got greedy. Tried to rob the wrong guy. Emily frowned. Who was the guy? Nathan hesitated. A cop. Agent Tomlin's eyes narrowed. You robbed a cop? I didn't. Nathan corrected. Eddie did. And when things went south, he threw me under the bus. Told the cops I was the mastermind, that I planned everything. Emily shook her head in disbelief. And they believed him? Nathan let out a bitter chuckle. I already had a record. They didn't need much convincing. Agent Tomlin rubbed his chin. And this Eddie, where is he now? Nathan shrugged. Last I heard, he got out of prison a few months ago. No idea where he went after that. The agent exchanged a look with his partner. We'll look into him. Nathan leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Look, I don't know if Eddie is behind this, but I do know this. Whoever it is, they've got power. Enough to frame me, enough to put a cop in the hospital, and enough to have Emily kidnapped in broad daylight. Emily's face darkened. And that means they won't stop. Silence fell over the room. Then, suddenly, boom. The walls shook as an explosion rocked the building. Emily screamed, ducking as shattered glass rained down from the windows. Nathan hit the ground, his ears ringing. Move. Agent Tomlin barked, grabbing his gun and motioning toward the back exit. Smoke poured into the room, the scent of burning metal filling the air. Nathan's heart pounded. Whoever was behind this, they had just made their next move. Nathan grabbed Emily's wrist, dragging her toward the door. Come on. Her feet stumbled over broken debris, her breath coming in sharp gasps. Behind them, Agent Tomlin kicked open the emergency exit, scanning the alley outside. Clear. Move, move, move. Nathan shoved Emily forward first, then followed, his mind spinning. The explosion. It had been meant for them. Someone didn't just want him locked up. They wanted him dead. The second they hit the alley, tires screeched somewhere nearby. A black SUV peeled away from the curb, speeding into the night. Tomlin cursed under his breath. They knew we were here. Nathan's chest heaved. That means there's a leak. Emily clutched her side, wincing. You think someone on the inside is helping them? Agent Tomlin's jaw tightened. It's possible. And if that's the case, we need to move fast before they come at us again. Nathan ran a hand through his hair, his pulse still racing. He had expected trouble, but this was a full-on war. Tomlin pulled out his radio. Base, this is Tomlin. Safe house is compromised. We need immediate evac. A crackled response came through. Copy that. Stand by for extraction. Nathan turned to Emily, his stomach twisting. Are you okay? She nodded, though her hands were still shaking. Yeah. Just processing. Nathan clenched his fists. They tried to kill us. Emily swallowed hard. Yeah. And that means they're scared. Nathan frowned. Scared? Emily met his gaze, her expression unreadable. Think about it. If they were really in control, they wouldn't need to blow up the safe house. They would have let the case play out, let the system bury you like it always does. Nathan's eyes widened slightly. You're saying they're getting desperate? Emily nodded. Which means we're closer to the truth than we think. Agent Tomlin exhaled. Then let's find it before they try again. In the distance, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air. But Nathan knew this wasn't over. Not even close. And if they didn't figure out who was behind this soon, next time, they wouldn't be so lucky. The night air was thick with smoke as the sirens wailed in the distance. Nathan stood in the alley, his pulse still pounding in his ears. His entire body was on edge, every muscle tight with adrenaline. Emily stood beside him, gripping her arm, her breath coming in short gasps. The explosion had shaken her, but her eyes still burned with determination. Agent Tomlin's radio crackled again. Evac unit is inbound. 5 minutes. Tomlin turned to Nathan. We don't have long. You need to tell me? Who else would want you dead? Nathan let out a breath, running a hand through his hair. I don't know, man. I've pissed off a lot of people in my life, but no one who could pull something like this. Emily shot him a sharp look. Think harder. Nathan clenched his jaw. I already told you about Eddie Lawson, but he's small time. This is something bigger. Tomlin's eyes narrowed. What about Officer Grant? Could he be dirty? Nathan hesitated. I never got a good read on him, but if he was dirty, then why would someone attack him and pin it on me? Emily frowned. Unless he knew something. Something they didn't want getting out. Nathan's stomach tightened. That made sense. Officer Grant hadn't just been beaten. He had been left in critical condition. That wasn't a random attack. That was a message. Tomlin's radio crackled again. Unit on site. Where's the package? Tomlin grabbed his radio. Alley exit. Moving now. He motioned for Nathan and Emily to follow. They rushed toward the street, where a black armored SUV waited. 2 agents stood outside, scanning the perimeter, weapons ready. Nathan and Emily piled into the back seat, Tomlin right behind them. The doors slammed shut, and the vehicle roared to life. The moment they were inside, Nathan turned to Emily. Are you sure you're okay? She let out a shaky breath. I don't know, but I don't think we have time to stop and process it. She was right. Tomlin pulled out his phone, scrolling through something. We've been digging into Officer Grant's records since the accusation against you. Something interesting came up. Nathan leaned in. What? Tomlin handed him the phone. His last call before the attack was to an unknown number. We traced it to a burner phone. Nathan's gut twisted. Who was he calling? We don't know yet, Tomlin admitted. But get this. The call lasted less than 30 seconds. It was made exactly 12 minutes before he was attacked. Emily's eyes widened. He knew he was in danger. Nathan clenched his fists. Or he was calling someone he thought he could trust. Tomlin nodded. Either way, that call is the key. Nathan's mind raced. Someone had gone through a lot of trouble to make sure Grant never talked. But what if? What if Grant was trying to help me? Nathan said suddenly. Emily frowned. What? Nathan sat up straighter. Think about it. What if he found out I was being set up? What if he was trying to warn me? Tomlin's expression darkened. If that's true, then whoever's behind this knew he was about to talk. That's why they took him out. Emily shivered. And they pinned it on you to tie up loose ends. The pieces were falling into place, but there was still one big question. Who was pulling the strings? Nathan gritted his teeth. We need to find out who Grant was calling. Tomlin nodded. Already working on it. The SUV took a sharp turn, speeding toward an undisclosed safe house. Nathan stared out the window, his mind still racing. The explosion. The attack on Grant. The setup. Someone was getting desperate, and that meant they were getting close to the truth. But just as Nathan thought they might have a moment to regroup, the driver cursed under his breath. We've got a tail. Nathan's blood ran cold. He turned and looked out the rear window. A black SUV was following them. Fast. Emily gripped the seat. You've got to be kidding me. Tomlin grabbed his radio. We're compromised. Engaging evasive maneuvers. The driver slammed on the gas. The SUV surged forward, weaving through traffic. The vehicle behind them did the same, gaining speed. Nathan's pulse pounded. Whoever was behind this, they weren't done yet. Not even close. The SUV swerved violently as the driver took a hard right, barely missing a parked car. Nathan gripped the door handle, his heart slamming against his ribs. They're still on us, the driver shouted, glancing at the rearview mirror. Nathan twisted in his seat and looked out the back window. The black SUV tailing them was relentless, weaving through traffic with expert precision. Who the hell are these guys? Emily muttered, her knuckles white as she clutched the seatbelt. Agent Tomlin grabbed his radio. We need backup now. The radio crackled, but the response was garbled. Static. Tomlin's eyes darkened. They're jamming our signal. Nathan's stomach twisted. That wasn't just some random gang after him. These people had resources. The driver cursed. We can't outrun them in city traffic. Nathan scanned the road ahead. A sharp turn was coming up, leading into a narrow alleyway. If we take that alley, can we lose them? He asked. The driver's grip tightened on the wheel. It's risky, but do it. The SUV jerked violently as the driver spun the wheel, tires screeching against the pavement. The alleyway was tight, barely wide enough for their vehicle. The walls of old brick buildings blurred past them in a flash. Emily squeezed her eyes shut as they narrowly missed a dumpster. Nathan turned back just in time to see their pursuers attempt the same turn. But they weren't as lucky. With a deafening crash, the black SUV clipped the alley wall, its back end swinging out. It skidded sideways, smashing into a row of trash cans before coming to a stop. Emily gasped. Did we lose them? Not for long, Tomlin muttered. We need to keep moving. The driver gunned it, exiting the alley onto a quieter street. Nathan's pulse was still racing, but he forced himself to focus. We have to figure out who's behind this, he said, rubbing his face. Because I'm done running. Tomlin nodded. We're heading to another safe house. You'll have a secure line there. We're going to dig deeper into Officer Grant's last phone call. Nathan clenched his jaw. Good. Because whoever tried to kill us, they're not stopping until I'm either in a cell or in the ground. Emily swallowed hard but said nothing. They had bought themselves some time, but time was running out. The new safe house was an abandoned auto repair shop on the outskirts of town. It wasn't much, but it was secure. Thick walls, reinforced doors, and only 2 exits. The second they arrived, Tomlin's team set up a mobile command center, laptops, surveillance monitors, and encrypted phone lines. Nathan and Emily sat at a metal table while Tomlin worked on tracing Officer Grant's last call. All right, Tomlin muttered, typing rapidly. Grant called a burner phone, but we ran a reverse trace on the tower ping. Nathan leaned forward. And Tomlin exhaled sharply. It led us to an address. He turned the laptop so Nathan and Emily could see. A photo appeared on the screen. A middle-aged man with cold eyes and a sharp jawline stared back at them. Nathan's breath caught in his throat. Emily's face paled. You've got to be kidding me, she whispered. Nathan shook his head, his hands clenching into fists. I know that guy, he muttered. Tomlin nodded grimly. Yeah, so do we. The name under the photo sent a shiver down Nathan's spine. Detective Alan Monroe. Emily sucked in a sharp breath. A cop? Nathan's pulse thundered in his ears. Detective Monroe had been a rising star in law enforcement for years, respected, untouchable. But Nathan had met him once before, and it hadn't ended well. Tomlin's voice was tight. Monroe is dirty. Internal Affairs has been investigating him for years, but nothing ever sticks. If he's the one behind this, then we're dealing with something way bigger than a bad arrest. Nathan's mind raced. If he's dirty, why would Grant call him? Emily answered before Tomlin could. Because he thought Monroe was one of the good guys. Nathan exhaled sharply. And that mistake almost got him killed. Tomlin typed something else into his laptop. Grant's still in critical condition, but we need to find a way to talk to him. If Monroe is the key to all this, Grant might be the only person who can connect the dots. Nathan rubbed his hands together, trying to stay calm. Then let's go see him. Tomlin's gaze hardened. That's not going to be easy. The hospital is crawling with cops, and if Monroe has people on the inside, we won't get near him without backup. Emily hesitated. So what do we do? Tomlin clicked a few more keys, then looked up. We don't go in through the front door. Nathan raised an eyebrow. Then how? Tomlin smirked. The hospital has a restricted access wing for high-risk patients. Grant is being kept there. But there's a way in, from the underground parking garage. Nathan exchanged a glance with Emily. This was insane. But then again, their entire lives had just exploded, literally. Nathan took a deep breath. All right, he said. Let's do it. 2 hours later. The hospital loomed ahead, its bright lights casting long shadows over the parking garage entrance. Nathan, Emily, and Tomlin sat inside an unmarked van, waiting. The plan was simple. Tomlin's team would create a minor security distraction, giving them just enough time to slip inside. You ready? Tomlin asked. Nathan cracked his knuckles. Let's do this. Tomlin gave the signal. Seconds later, a loud commotion erupted near the hospital's main entrance. An alarm blaring, voices shouting. That was their cue. Nathan and Emily slipped out of the van, moving quickly toward the underground garage. The air smelled of oil and stale exhaust, the sound of their footsteps echoing. Tomlin led the way, keeping low as they moved toward a back elevator. Once we're inside, we'll have 5 minutes, he whispered. Nathan nodded, heart pounding. They reached the elevator. Tomlin swiped a stolen access card. The doors slid open with a ding. The moment they stepped inside, Nathan felt a sinking feeling in his gut. Something was wrong. The doors closed. The elevator started moving. And then, the lights flickered, then went out completely. A chilling voice crackled through the emergency speaker. Nice try, Carter. Nathan's blood turned to ice. He knew that voice. Detective Alan Monroe. The elevator stopped. Then, with a mechanical clunk, it started dropping. Fast. Emily screamed as the floor seemed to disappear beneath them. Nathan grabbed the railing, his heart slamming in his chest. They were trapped, and Monroe had just sprung the trap. The elevator plunged. Nathan barely had time to react before his stomach lurched and gravity pressed against him. The emergency lights flickered, casting eerie flashes of red against the steel walls. Emily screamed, gripping the railing with white-knuckled hands. Hold on, Tomlin shouted, his voice barely audible over the screeching metal. Nathan's mind raced. This isn't a malfunction. Monroe is trying to kill us. The numbers on the panel blinked downward at an alarming speed. B4, B5, B6. They were going to crash. Think, Nathan, think. His eyes darted to the emergency hatch on the ceiling. It was too high to reach, unless... He looked at Tomlin. We need to stop this thing. Tomlin's jaw clenched. Unless you've got superpowers, I don't see how. Emily gasped. The emergency brake. There's gotta be a manual override. Nathan's gaze snapped to the panel beneath the buttons. Help me pry this open. Tomlin yanked out a pocket knife and jammed it into the panel seam. With a loud pop, the metal cover snapped off, revealing a tangled mess of wires. Which one? Nathan demanded. Tomlin's eyes scanned the mess, sweat dripping down his brow. I don't know. I'm not an engineer. Emily's breath came out in short gasps. Red. It's always red in the movies, right? Nathan gritted his teeth. Screw it. He grabbed a handful of wires and yanked. The elevator jolted, then stopped. The sudden force sent them sprawling to the floor, gasping for breath. The screeching metal went silent, replaced by the eerie hum of stillness. Nathan's heart hammered in his chest. Tomlin let out a shaky breath. You just saved our lives. Nathan didn't feel like celebrating. They were still trapped, and Monroe wasn't done with them yet. Emily sat up, rubbing her wrists. Now what? Tomlin pointed to the ceiling hatch. We climb. Nathan grunted and reached for Tomlin's hands. He boosted himself up, gripping the edge of the hatch. With a grunt, he pushed the door open and hoisted himself up onto the top of the elevator. A gust of stale air hit his face. The shaft stretched upward into darkness, nothing but cables and steel walls around him. Emily climbed up next, followed by Tomlin. Tomlin pulled out his radio, clicking the button. Base, this is Tomlin. Safe house compromised. Hospital compromised. Monroe is dirty. Repeat. Monroe is dirty. Silence. Then, static. Emily shivered. No one's answering. Nathan exhaled. That means he's cutting us off. Tomlin looked up, scanning the cables. We need to climb. Nathan nodded, but his gut twisted. This isn't over. Monroe knew we were coming. He planned this, which means he's still watching. Emily gritted her teeth and grabbed onto the side ladder bolted to the shaft. Let's move. They climbed. The metal rungs were cold against Nathan's fingers, each movement slow and deliberate. His breath came in short, focused bursts. 5 feet, 10 feet, 15. Then, a clank echoed above them. Nathan froze. Something was moving. Tomlin's eyes widened. Someone's up there. Nathan's pulse roared in his ears. Then, out of the darkness, a shadowy figure leaned over the top of the shaft. A gun gleamed in his hand. Going somewhere? Monroe's voice was smooth, amused. Emily gasped. It's him. Monroe smirked. I gotta hand it to you, Carter. You're harder to kill than I expected. Nathan gritted his teeth. Sorry to disappoint. Monroe sighed, shaking his head. You should have stayed locked up. Would have been easier for everyone. Nathan's blood boiled. You framed me. You tried to kill me. And now you're taking out anyone who gets in your way. Monroe smiled. Welcome to reality. Then he raised the gun. Emily screamed. Nathan's heart stopped. Then, a gunshot exploded through the air. Nathan flinched, expecting pain, but it never came. Instead, Monroe staggered back, clutching his shoulder. More gunfire erupted from the darkness. Tomlin shoved Emily down, shielding her as bullets rained through the shaft. Nathan's mind spun. Someone else was shooting at Monroe. From above. Monroe growled in pain, retreating into the shadows. This isn't over, Carter. Then, he vanished. Nathan gasped for air, his chest heaving. Tomlin's radio crackled to life. A familiar voice came through. Hold your position. Back up inbound. Nathan's breath caught. Who is that? Emily asked, her voice shaking. Tomlin grinned. Judge Haynes. Nathan exhaled sharply. She found us. Tomlin nodded. And she's bringing hell with her. Nathan's jaw tightened. Monroe was still out there. But for the first time, Nathan wasn't running anymore. He was fighting back. The gunfire stopped. The elevator shaft was eerily silent, except for the ragged breathing of Nathan, Emily, and Tomlin. The metal rungs of the ladder pressed cold against Nathan's fingers as he held on, waiting for the next move. Somewhere above them, Judge Haynes had arrived. Somewhere below them, Detective Monroe had disappeared. Nathan clenched his jaw. Not this time. Tomlin pressed his radio. Haynes, we're pinned in the shaft. Monroe is wounded but still in play. The judge's voice crackled back. We have eyes on the building. SWAT is moving in. Stay put. Nathan shook his head. Not a chance. Emily grabbed his arm. Nathan, don't. He was already moving. Ignoring the burning in his muscles, Nathan climbed faster, gripping the rungs 2 at a time. Tomlin cursed and followed after him, with Emily reluctantly behind. The emergency exit hatch was just ahead. Nathan reached for it, but a shadow moved above him. Monroe. Bleeding. Angry. Armed. Nathan lunged before Monroe could fire. The gun went off, boom. The bullet ricocheting off the metal walls. Nathan grabbed Monroe's wrist, forcing the gun up. They struggled on the narrow ledge, a brutal fight in the tight space. Monroe's blood dripped onto Nathan's arm, but the detective was strong, desperate. He shoved Nathan hard, nearly sending him tumbling back down the shaft. Tomlin grabbed Nathan's shirt, steadying him. "Hold him," Tomlin barked. Emily climbed up, grabbing onto the side railing, eyes wide with fear. Nathan gritted his teeth and swung. His fist connected with Monroe's jaw. The detective stumbled, but he wasn't done. He drew a knife from his belt and slashed. Nathan barely dodged. The blade sliced through his sleeve, missing his skin by inches. No more running. No more hiding. With a burst of adrenaline, Nathan tackled Monroe, driving him against the steel wall. The knife clattered to the floor below. Monroe gasped, blood dripping from his mouth. "You think this changes anything?" he sneered. Nathan glared. "Yeah, I do." With one final punch, Nathan sent Monroe crashing backward. His foot slipped off the ledge. For a split second, the detective's eyes widened in shock. Then, he fell. The darkness below swallowed him whole. Silence. Emily let out a choked gasp, covering her mouth. Tomlin exhaled, shaking his head. Damn. Nathan's heart pounded. He peered over the edge, but Monroe was gone, lost somewhere in the depths of the shaft. A voice crackled over Tomlin's radio. "SWAT is inside. Where are you?" Tomlin pressed the button. "Elevator shaft. Monroe's down." "Copy that. Sending a team." Nathan exhaled and looked at Emily. "You okay?" She nodded, still shaken. "Are you?" He thought about it. Thought about everything. The setup, the years of running, the guilt. And then, he thought about fighting back. For the first time in years, he wasn't the one falling. "I think I will be," he muttered. Tomlin grinned. "Come on. Let's get out of here." 20 minutes later, Nathan, Emily, and Tomlin walked out of the hospital, surrounded by armed officers. SWAT had taken control of the building. The streets were flooded with flashing red and blue lights. Judge Haynes stood by a patrol car, arms crossed. She turned as they approached. "You're alive." "That's a good start." Nathan smirked. "Not for lack of trying." Haynes glanced at Tomlin. "Monroe?" Tomlin shook his head. "Gone. Fell into the shaft. We don't know if he survived." The judge's expression darkened. "We'll find him." Nathan exhaled, exhaustion settling into his bones. "So what happens now?" Haynes studied him. "You fought back." "That's something." Nathan frowned. "That doesn't answer my question." The judge sighed. "Officially, you're still wearing that ankle monitor." Nathan looked down at the device strapped to his leg. "But," Haynes continued, "I think we can make a case for wrongful arrest. With Monroe exposed, the charges against you don't hold weight." Nathan's breath caught. "You're saying I might actually be free?" Haynes nodded. "You might." Emily let out a shaky laugh, pressing a hand to her mouth. "Oh my God." Nathan swallowed hard. He had spent years thinking freedom was impossible. Now, for the first time, it was real. Haynes gave him a pointed look. "But it's up to you what you do with that freedom." Nathan met her gaze. "I know." Emily wiped her eyes. "So, what now?" Nathan looked up at the night sky. The stars were clear, the city humming around them. For the first time in years, he had a choice. And he wasn't wasting it. The weight of the moment pressed against Nathan's chest. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't running. He wasn't hiding. He wasn't being dragged in handcuffs to another cold cell, another forgotten corner of the world. He was standing free. Almost. The ankle monitor on his leg was still there, a physical reminder that his fight wasn't quite over. But it wouldn't be there for much longer. Judge Haynes stood in front of him, arms crossed. The glow of police lights flickered across her sharp features. "If Monroe is still out there, he won't stop." Nathan nodded. "I know." She studied him for a moment, then sighed. "I'll push for the charges against you to be dropped, but this isn't just about clearing your name anymore. It's about what comes next." Emily stepped forward. "And what if Monroe tries again? What if he comes after Nathan?" Haynes' jaw tightened. "Then we make sure he never gets the chance." Tomlin walked up, tucking his gun back into his holster. "We've got agents searching the lower levels. If Monroe survived that fall, he's either hurt or on the run. Either way, he won't get far." Nathan exhaled. He wanted to believe that. But he also knew men like Monroe. They didn't just disappear. Emily grabbed his arm. Nathan, you don't have to fight this alone. He turned to her, something in his chest loosening. For years, he had convinced himself that he had no one, that Emily was better off without him, that the world had already decided what kind of man he was. But standing here now, he knew that wasn't true. He wasn't alone, and for the first time, he didn't want to be. Nathan glanced back at Judge Haynes. So, what happens when I get this thing off? He motioned to the ankle monitor. The judge gave him a small smirk. That's up to you, Mr. Carter. Nathan let out a breath. I don't know how to be free. Emily nudged him. Then maybe it's time you learned. Nathan looked at her, looked at the sister he thought he had lost forever, and he realized something. This wasn't just about clearing his name. It was about starting over. Tomlin clapped a hand on his shoulder. You could do worse than a fresh start, Carter. Nathan snorted. Yeah? And what would that even look like? Emily smiled softly. Whatever you want it to. Nathan blinked at her, then looked around. The flashing lights, the officers, the chaos that had been his life for so long. He didn't have all the answers. He didn't know what the future held. But for the first time in his life, he had a choice. He turned to Judge Haynes. Guess we'll see what happens. She nodded. I guess we will. Nathan took a deep breath and stepped forward. Not as a fugitive, not as a lost cause, but as a man finally ready to face the world. And this time, he wouldn't run.